Do you agree, though, that white people are treated unfairly in this country, particularly the Afrikaner?
Obviously, many whites feel that the law is being used against them.
Isn't that government trying to redress the injustices of the past? How else do you bring black people into an economy that they were never given an opportunity to participate in during apartheid?
We believe in redress, we believe in restitution, but the ANC's mechanisms have not worked. The only people that benefit are the people with good connections in the ANC who want to use their connections to get a big piece of every state contract because of the color of their skin and enrich themselves massively.
Guys, so you see this discussion. I love this discussion so much because you could see the passion in Clement Manyatela and also Helen Zille really trying to really understand how it is that South Africa can compensate for historical injustices, but at the same time actually lay appropriate blame on the failed policies of the ANC in this last 30 years. And so this video here, Helen Zille is actually arguing that, in her response to Trump's offer for the Afrikaner community to come to seek refugee status in the US. She actually thinks that Donald Trump is actually a crafty politician, that she's not really interested in having her people, or as white South Africans especially, leave South Africa, because that would be a brain drain, talents that are needed to build the economy. So she thinks that it's not a wise thing to do. But also in her response to the fact of whether whites are really being treated unfairly in South Africa, she actually argues that, there are these race-based laws that actually are against white South Africans, and a large portion of the white South Africans in South Africa believe that, the government is actually using these laws against them. But then there was a really interesting face-off now between Manyatela and Zille, actually, as they actually argue on how, this whole thing would point the legacy of apartheid and how to do that. But anyway, Helen Zille thinks that, one problem is not necessarily, she believes in redress anyway of this historical injustice. But over 30 years, there have been failed policies, these issues like BBBEE policies and all of that keeps people poorer, that even as though these kind of policies are supposed to kind of like redress, they are failing. And so there has to be an alternative. This is Helen Zille's way of thinking. And, I think there were times when, Clement Manyatela is trying to really pull Helen Zille in, because right now there's kind of like this whole treason mantra of AfriForum solidarity going to the US, those probably some white South Africans being responsible for informing Donald Trump's advisors in a way that now has made, or is probably supposed to make, South Africa lose some funding and probably force the ANC to act on what probably the people want or what the US wants. But anyway, she actually denies that but argues that South Africa would necessarily be in enmity with the US as long as it chooses to be a proxy of Iran or probably Russia in this regard, and that the policies of its left-wing policies, and we would always put it in a really dangerous firing position, kind of like receiving end of the US foreign policy. And a really interesting discussion. Let's just quickly listen to Clement Manyatela and Helen Zille break down really sensitive issues on how to redress the historical injustice against blacks in South Africa, but also how to resolve the discrimination against white in a post-independent South Africa, and also the fact of whether Helen Zille has been among those who has actually been in advising or probably meeting with Donald Trump's advisors, giving them advice on how to see South Africa, that has actually put South Africa in the mess it has found itself today, losing PEPFAR, potentially losing AGOA, and all of that. Share your thoughts also in the comments.
Yeah. And as the DA, what is your position on the refugee offer that he made to the Afrikaner community here?
Donald Trump is a very crafty politician. He knows that the biggest punishment for South Africa would be to strip some of its key skills from the country. And he knows that the economy would take a very serious knock if he were to find a way of extracting the key skills from South Africa. And he also knows that he would get a major investment injection and skills injection for America if you were to do that. So obviously, we would strongly urge people to stay in South Africa and to work to try and do whatever we can to make our country succeed and make our country prosperous. But Trump is very canny. And when he makes a move like that, he knows he's thought about it.
And do you, because there are a few organizations that are saying, I spoke to the SA Chamber of Commerce in the US, they're saying there are quite a number of people that have made requests for information about this refugee offer. Do you agree, though, that white people are treated unfairly in this country, particularly the Afrikaner community?
Well, if you look at what the Bella Act is trying to do, you will see an example of that. And if you look at about 115 laws on the statute book that have been passed since democracy that reintroduce the right of the state to judge people according to the color of their skin and apply race-based criteria through the state on the population, you can see very clearly that it is very problematic. And obviously, many whites feel that the law is being used against them.
But isn't that government trying to redress the injustices of the past, as in fact encouraged by the Constitution? How else do you bring black people to participate in the economy if you're not going to bring about policies that are going to be intentional about bringing them into an economy that they were never given an opportunity to participate in during apartheid?
Indeed, and that must happen. We believe in redress, we believe in restitution, but the ANC's mechanisms have not worked. They have not worked at all. We have over 50% youth unemployment on the limited measure of unemployment, maybe over 62 on the expanded definition. And we have well over 30% unemployment for the rest of the country. So people are getting poorer and poorer and poorer and less employed and more marginalized from the economy. So it's obviously not working, all of these laws. All those laws do is actually marginalize the poor from the economy more and more because it chases away investment, it shuts down jobs, and it makes things more and more difficult for people to participate in the economy.
Yeah.
The only people that benefit are the people with good connections in the ANC who want to use their connections to get a big piece of every state contract because of the color of their skin and enrich themselves, massive corruption, and the poor get poorer and poorer. So if those laws had helped to address the legacy of the past and get people out of poverty, it would be one thing to say we have to apply them more. But the fact is they've made things worse, and a lot worse for many people. So we have to use a different method.
Yeah, so and I'm interested in what method you think as the DA we could use. But just to respond to the failure, because it's often generalized in that these laws are not working, but that's not necessarily true. There are people that have benefited from employment equity legislation. I mean, you go speak to, for instance, even the big business guys, speak to the Standard Bank Group CEO, Sim Chabalala. He will tell you.
I know him
that,
well.
Yeah, he'll tell you, I'm a product.
He's my friend.
I'm a product of that policy. Go to the first black CEO of ABSA, Daniel Minele. When you have institutions being forced to be deliberate about transformation, they actually do get equally equipped black people so that we change the structure of the economy, because even the Employment Commission will show you that even in top positions, you still have a concentration of white people occupying those positions, over 58% or so. So how do we bring them into that sector as well? Because there are black people that are equally capable of holding these positions if it's not going to happen through these kind of legislations. And I'm saying, albeit with the limitations that it has.
Well, firstly, nobody wants to keep capable black people out of being at the very top. Everyone wants them to be at the very top. And everyone is searching for people in those jobs. But the problem is not at the top. The problem is at the bottom, where more and more people are out of the economy entirely. And if you ask a cross-section of business people who've invested in South Africa and who've considered investing but have been turned away, if you ask them what is the biggest deterrent, and polls have been done, number one was the electricity crisis. People said that the lack of reliable electricity was a big deterrent to investment, and any deterrent to investment is a deterrent to job creation. And the second biggest was all of these laws, these BBBEE laws that drive away investment and make the poor poorer and poorer, and drive away jobs and drive away opportunities on the ladder. And those are the people that restitution needs to look after.
What's your suggestion on how we redress the injustices of the past? How do we, what is a policy as the DA you think can work? Because obviously, I'm sure you agree, the playing field is not leveled here. There are white people that were privileged during apartheid who had the opportunities to get into any sector. You've got black people who didn't have much of those opportunities. So they are much behind their white counterparts. So how do we bring them to a point where this is now the playing field is leveled?
Well, you're exactly talking the right language. You're talking about expanding opportunities, not manipulating outcomes. And obviously it takes time to completely level the playing fields, but the first thing you've got to do is fix education. If you've got children who can't read for meaning at the end of grade 4, you've got a very serious problem. Then we've got an entire economic justice policy, the most comprehensive restitution and redress program of any party in the country. And this is an economic redress program based on the Sustainable Development Goals that looks at how we empower the poorest of the poor and harness businesses across the board to ensure that more opportunities are opened, more training is done, more jobs are created, more investment occurs, and so that it really benefits people who've been left behind.
Yeah. Just before we wrap up then, Helen, when I posted the conversation I had with you in December, where you almost preempted what was coming following your trip to the US, to London as well, a few people were saying, oh, look, she's the person who was having conversations with Trump's advisors. It's not a surprise that Trump is acting in this way. So do you think the conversations you had with Trump's advisors, and maybe even the conversations AfriForum had with the advisors, may have led to Trump also taking this decision that he's taken now against South Africa?
The last thing I would ever do, the very last thing I would ever do, would be to tell in America, let alone Trump's advisors, that they must withdraw the aid, the PEPFAR money for AIDS, and withdraw trade concessions. The DA has done more than any other party to try to save AGOA and the preferential treatment South Africa gets from the United States. It's not those of us who listen to Trump's advisors when they tell us what's going to happen that are the problem. It's parties that pass an expropriation act. And more than anything else, it is the party that becomes the pivot around which all the anti-Western forces of the world are coagulating. If the ANC is going to act as a proxy for Iran, and if it is going to turn BRICS into a geopolitical force for anti-Western countries, it must not expect the West to continue funding so many of South Africa's programs and giving us preferential access to trade.
Helen Zille, thank you so much for making time for us.